This is a video by none other than Lonerbox, okay? Lonerbox right here, everybody, okay? I'm going to share you the video. Subscribe to Lonerbox, and we're going to watch it together and react because I got a lot to say about this. Because I've had a lot to say. You all know that I've had a lot to say about Lauren Southern. You know? I really have. I really have had a lot to say about Lauren Southern. And the funny thing is, I've been right about all of it. Everybody's been giving me shit about this, that, and the other thing. Let me turn that. Whoa, that's not right. Turn that contrast up. There we go. There we go. That's a little better. I've been right about it. I've been right about it. I said, guys, this is beyond the pale. This is ridiculous. The idea that people are giving a platform to Lauren Southern and aren't fucking pushing back like crazy. The fact there are people in this space who call themselves liberals or, God forbid, leftists, and they're helping this genocide-denying motherfucker. Well, guess what? We're about to learn. Okay? Are you fucking ready? Let's do this. Lonerbox, take it away.
Hey there, fellow leftists. Remember that time when Lauren Southern went out into the Mediterranean and shot flares at refugee boats? I don't. That never happened. Plenty of people might have said it happened. Fuck, back when I was a 60-sub seedling, I said that happened. And then by contrast, get yourself detained in Italy for shooting flares at refugee boats. What a blockhead. But consider this my personal growth video, because I'm here to set things straight. Lauren Southern did not go out into the sea with nets and hooks trying to drown refugees like some kind of Dora the Nazi explorer, and she absolutely did not shoot any flares at the boats. But... So you might be wondering, why am I talking about the boats? That was 4 years ago. Why am I arguing with a version of Lauren Southern that no longer exists? Do leftists not believe in rehabilitation and grumble? Well, yes, I do, and don't worry, because I'm only bringing up Lauren Southern's past after hearing what she's had to say about it today. She's had the question of the boats brought up to her quite a few times since she came back to YouTube.
And some of you have witnessed this. I know a lot of you are fans of streams. I know we got a lot of streamer fans in here. Some of you have seen this shit live. Some of you have seen Lauren Southern going on and playing pretty and going, oh, the leftists, they lie about me. Well, guess what? You're in for a treat. You've seen this with your own fucking eyes.
I've listened to her explanations, and if I thought this was a version of Lauren that no longer exists, I probably wouldn't be making this video. But before we get into that, let's talk about what happened. Part 1. The boats. In the early 2010s, the first waves of an unprecedented refugee crisis started to appear in Europe. The aftermath of the Arab Spring had led to the collapse of several regimes in northern Africa. Syria had plunged into a civil war, and conditions in neighboring countries were quickly deteriorating. The result was millions of displaced people, the vast majority of whom decided to go to Europe. Okay, that's not true, most of them actually went to these countries, but Europe did take a good few. Out of all the main entry points to Europe, the most deadly was the central Mediterranean route from Libya to Italy. From 2012 to 2013, the number of crossings along this route had almost quadrupled. The people crossing were typically doing so on cheap, overcrowded boats provided by human smugglers, and as the crossings increased, so too did the number of deaths. On October 3rd, 2013, the crisis made headlines after more than 360 people drowned in a shipwreck that was within sight of the Italian island of Lampedusa. The Italian president called the event a slaughter of innocents, and later that month, the Italian government launched a rescue mission called Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum was what we'll describe as the Chad operation. They had 900 staff, an amphibious assault carrier, 2 frigates, 2 submarines, helicopters, and drones. In its first year, they rescued over 150,000 people, arrested 350 smugglers, and confiscated 9 ships. However, the operation was also expensive, and in typical EU fashion, none of the other member states were willing to support it. Along with that, EU arrangements made it difficult for asylum seekers to move past Italy, meaning they were becoming quickly concentrated in the southern coast. The backlash was a rise of anti-immigrant sentiment and the idea that Mare Nostrum was serving as a pull factor, encouraging illegitimate migrants to make the journey over when they otherwise wouldn't have. The operation was terminated at the end of 2014.
Okay, one quick second. We're going to take a quick pause here. That term is going to be really important, so I want to make sure you all caught it. A pull factor. A pull factor is a political term for something that would inspire people to leave another country and come over to your country when they otherwise wouldn't have. Okay? Keep that in mind. That's called a pull factor. And it's important to understand because he's going to use that term a lot. I'm lucky because I've watched this video once before. And so I can tell you all about that. Pay attention to that word because it's going to come up a lot. Okay? Let's continue.
And then replaced by a smaller body that covered a lot less space. The idea was that this would reduce people's willingness to make the dangerous journey over. And then, in the early months of 2015, this happened. You see those big spikes there? That's the death rate in 2015, just after Mare Nostrum was ended. In April of that year, a breaking point was reached when 2 boats capsized and over 1,000 people drowned. As a response to the rising death rate, the gap in search and rescue was filled by non-government organizations who sent out 4 vessels in May. By 2017, they were the biggest rescue actors in the Mediterranean. But the NGOs were immediately viewed with suspicion. Unlike Mare Nostrum, they didn't have the power to arrest smugglers or to confiscate boats. All they could do was rescue people, to which increasingly right-wing governments in southern Europe said, "F that." NGOs were branded as sea taxis and vice smugglers. They were accused of encouraging human trafficking.
Just want you to notice that, right? Non-governmental organizations, charities, went in and said, we're not going to do any of the policing. We're just going to make sure people don't die. That's what we want to do. And the right wing in Europe went wild, calling them basically smugglers themselves, when all they were doing was making sure the people who were coming over anyway weren't drowning. That's the takeaway from this segment.
And even in some cases of directly colluding with smugglers. Several criminal investigations were launched, ships were frequently impounded, and the Italian government in particular started using policy initiatives to restrict the movement of rescue missions. For some people on the right, this wasn't enough. Enter Lauren Southern. In 2017, a French anti-immigrant youth group called Generation Identity decided to play their own role in policing the Mediterranean. They set up a project called Defend Europe. They had a website which had a mission statement describing the migrant wave as an invasion, and they set up a fundraiser for travel costs, ships, and research. Wait, is that the 4chan logo? Okay. Their goal was to protest NGO boats trying to enter Europe and ultimately to start a rescue mission of their own. By rescue, I mean they wanted to take anyone they found back to Libya, and more on that later. In the summer of 2017, a group of GI members took a small boat out to the Mediterranean where they tried to obstruct an NGO vessel called the Aquarius. The group was joined by a young Lauren Southern who live-streamed the event whilst holding up a hand flare and chanting the words, "No more illegal immigration."
So this is a boat called the Aquarius that has been illegally bringing in migrants from the Libyan Ocean for the last while. And they're just heading out again to bring in more illegal migrants, and we are going to stop them. No way they're coming in here. No way they're bringing in more illegals. No more! No more! Illegal immigration! No more! No more! Illegal immigration!
After the event, they celebrated on a live stream and even asked 4chan to help them in the future.
What we want to do, we want to defend Europe from this invasion of migrants and illegals. And we need now, in fact, the help of the 4chan poll artists, all the people on their PCs, you on the internet and we on
the 4chan poll people, by the way, is what he said there. With the thanks to 4chan poll people.
See, together we can stop this.
Absolutely. So Paul, we're gonna need your help now.
So at first glance, this is pretty fucked up, right? Running around like some kind of self-appointed border patrol officer, trying to obstruct a boat that had rescued over 10,000 people. Of all the things Lauren could have to regret about her past, I'd imagine this would come out on top. But that isn't where the story ended. A year later, the Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini refused entrance to the Aquarius. Pay attention to him, by the way, he's important. The vessel, which had over 600 people on board, was temporarily stranded before it was finally accepted by the Prime Minister of Spain. Although no one had been formally charged at this point, the NGO was repeatedly accused of colluding with human traffickers, and now that they weren't allowed to dock in Italy, they were in a grey zone. Then, with a series of contradictory statements from various parties, the Aquarius had its registration removed and would no longer operate as a rescue vessel. At the end of 2018, the Italian authorities went one step further and called for the Aquarius to be impounded, stating that 24 of the ship's crew members, including their captain, were put under investigation for trafficking and illegal management of waste. Naturally, the NGO's head of emergencies described these allegations as defamatory and unfounded, so don't worry, we will find out which one of these sides is lying. But first, we should see what Lauren had to say about it. In 2018, she made a video celebrating the deflagging of the Aquarius, and her reasoning was more or less the same as it is now. In a very recent conversation with a streamer called Booksmarts, she gave off quite a few explanations, so there's plenty to work with here. Part 2. Trafficking.
So why the Aquarius was under investigation and why it was ultimately shut down and impounded for illegal actions is, first of all, they were under investigation by the Italians for going on the coast and working as a trafficking service, not a rescue service.
Back in the summer of 2017, a group called Generation Identity held a campaign to protest NGO boats colluding with traffickers and sneaking illegal immigrants into Sicily and, I guess, all over Europe.
This is one of the most common accusations laid against NGOs, and here's how it works. Typically, people in Northern Africa would pay smugglers for a boat to take them across the Mediterranean. Most of these boats are little more than rubber dinghies, which aren't considered safe for the open sea.
Obviously.
Once they were at sea,
Obviously.
the migrants would then make a distress call, which has to be answered by a vessel in the area. The people in the dinghy are then taken on board the vessel where they can continue their journey safely. This is how a standard rescue mission works, and from the perspective of the rescuers, all of this is perfectly legal. What isn't legal is if NGO workers are caught directly communicating or colluding with smugglers. Even when they are seen, the NGO workers are instructed not to interact with them and definitely not to confront them. It turns out smugglers can be kind of aggressive. Now, Lauren is correct that the Aquarius crew members were accused of colluding with smugglers. Salvini made a fairly direct reference to this when he closed Italy's ports to them. But what she doesn't say is, this was never proven. And while I have you there...
Uh-oh! An accusation by a far-right guy is full of shit? How full of shit, you ask? Well, let's keep watching and find out, because I'm going to tell you, it's really full of shit. Lauren is really full of shit.
Every single investigation into criminal activity by NGOs in the Central Mediterranean has so far ended with an acquittal. 5 investigations were closed without any formal charges, and so far there has only been one that will go to trial. No, not the Aquarius, a German vessel called Jugendrettet, and they aren't even being accused of helping smugglers. Their charge is that on one of their missions, they potentially rescued migrants who were not in a situation of distress.
Oops. By the way, isn't that absurd? The German ship was accused of rescuing migrants who weren't in enough distress. They weren't distressed enough floating out in the middle of the ocean.
That's it. The closest they've come to a conviction was against a captain who was found guilty of registration issues and then later acquitted in the appeal trial. And wait. There's more. It turns out that a couple of the investigations weren't even opened because of criminality. In at least 2 cases, Italian prosecutors impounded vessels which had been stranded after Salvini refused to let them dock. One of them had been at sea for 19 days, and according to the prosecutors, Italy had been breaking international law by leaving people stranded for so long.
So Salvini, a right-wing, anti-immigration guy, broke international law, stranding the vessels out in the ocean until they technically broke a law, and then he enforced the law after breaking international law so that he could support his agenda. And we're not even done. Look at where that fucking play bar is at. We're not even close to done. Oh, we got so much more. Just so we're clear as to what's been going on so far.
They chose to impound the ships just so they could get the migrants to shore. Wait. So that's it? The accusations are completely baseless? They're just a tool used by right-wing politicians so they can impound ships, smear the rescuers, and hinder their fundraising, all just to stop refugees from arriving? Well, yeah. Except, there is in fact one person who does claim to have definitive evidence against NGOs. Incidentally, that one person is none other than Lauren Southern.
Oh, what a
Yep.
surprise.
Lauren Southern has a video on her channel called Undercover, exposing NGO smugglers in Greece. Now that is huge. Because if that's true, it would mean that she managed to find something that all the authorities missed. Let's investigate this. Part 2.5. Lauren Southern is a lying hack who lies about things and calls it journalism. Sorry, that's poisoning the well. We should. Part 2.5. A review of Lauren Southern's journalism. So this video is a couple of years old, but it's extremely relevant to the topic, and it's also a teaser segment from her Borderless documentary, which Lauren wants more people to see.
So like that was the project I spent the most money on, which was very humanizing of migrants. But the thing is, none of my critics watch it, and that was 3 years ago.
You're welcome, Lauren. The story being covered is about a Greek NGO founder called Panos Moraitis, who is accused of helping people smugglers as well as money laundering, espionage, and forgery. Before giving himself up to the police in Lesbos, Panos was away from the island and considered to be in hiding. But before the police got to him, Lauren wanted to get a hold of him for an interview. Look, this is impressive, isn't it? There's an evidence board, there's Panos in hiding, and these two are going to find him before he's taken into custody.
And they're linked to Doctors Without Borders. I mean, they're hugely connected, but it all leads back to Panos.
So how are we going to get him?
I'm going to reach out to the rest of the RCR members who haven't been arrested and who are still active, see if we can get a connection to him, and then we can maybe arrange a call, maybe a meeting, but I think that's so unlikely given that he's in hiding from the police.
Well, we can try.
We can try.
I mean,
Thank you very much, Lotta Apples. Thank you very much.
There are other high-profile members. You can't be nowhere.
Then it goes to 1 week later. They still haven't found him yet, but now they might have a lead.
You know, all volunteers have resigned in fear of being arrested. There are very limited people that can represent the organization, and these operate off the record at the moment while they are trying
Right. Here's the problem.
Uh-oh.
The date on that laptop is the 10th of October. The first scene was 1 week earlier, so
By the way, huge props to Lonerbox for catching this. Huge props to Lonerbox for catching this. The date in their movie, on their own screen, filmed. For their fucking film, they left it in. Wednesday the 10th of October. Pay attention now.
third, which is weird because the guy they're looking for turned himself in on the 19th of September. So they're talking about...
They were lying. On the 3rd, they waited a fake week to the 10th, but this guy had already turned himself into the authorities a month earlier.
about trying to find him 3 weeks after he was already found. What? None of this is real. Everything they're apparently trying to figure out was already available in the press when they recorded this. This isn't investigative journalism. This is a film set with two wallopers pretending to be
Lying.
investigative journalists. I feel like we should watch a bit more of this just so we can enjoy Lauren's acting.
Okay,
So-
contact them right away and let's see where we can
Yeah,
go from this. 'Cause that
'cause
would be amazing.
Even if we don't get this former person, we've still got the press person, so we can probably.
We've got
still-
someone that is in contact with Panos.
Maybe he's even
We'd have
met
to.
Panos. Okay,
Yeah.
let's do it.
Good morning.
That's right.
Yeah, no, this is worth it, I promise. So, ERCI have WhatsApped me. I've been talking to them the past few hours. They've said that we can actually get an interview directly with Panos, not even on Skype, on the phone, in
With
person.
Panos?
In person. Yeah, the guy who's behind all of this. So, he's arriving in Mytilene in 2 hours, which is he's basically. I've got this shipping app which they've given me an update to, and they've said that he is here on the ship here, which is going to come around.
Right. Here's the problem. Kalen, that's his name, is waking Lauren up just after midnight, presumably an hour after that laptop scene, to say that the guy who turned himself in 3 weeks ago was going to turn himself in the next 2 hours. Are we following? So it's midnight, sometime after October the 10th, and Panos is arriving in Lesbos at 3 in the morning.
Is security up?
Yeah, he said he can do it. He said actually we should probably leave like now because we want to get there really early, speak to the lawyer, and just figure out like a route onto the ship.
Okay, so we have to leave now. So why is it broad daylight when they arrive at the boat? And why is this
that's a little
definitely
weird.
real text exchange happening at 8 in the morning? The strange
Midnight. They got to get there within 2 hours, and then they film thing at 8 in the morning. Something's not adding up here, folks. Something ain't adding up. Orion, that's Trippy Red, the god himself. All right? Trippy Red. That's the tribute. Now let's continue.
thing is, they did interview this guy. It's just that the lead up to that interview completely changes in her Borderless documentary. Instead of happening in Charlie's detective bunker, it just happens over the phone.
Apparently there's going to be a passenger ship docking in Lesbos this morning with the leader of ERCI on it, this Panos Moraitis guy.
Yeah, he's the one that's in hiding from police for the last little bit.
Fucking... what?
Thank you very
why
much,
would you do-
Jangles. Thank you for the
interview
sub.
itself
Really
is
appreciate it.
Pretty underwhelming. He just says what his charges are and that he denies them, but here comes the expose. After this interview, when the cameras went off, they claimed, and I emphasize the word claimed here, to have met with Panos' lawyer where they secretly recorded this.
They said that we were actually money laundering unknown sums of money. And the press in Greece said like 500 million. And in reality it was 500,000 euro, which if you engage with NGOs, you know it's a small amount of money actually, for 3 years.
Wow.
But we were laundering it.
So I've just gone back to watch some
Oh my god! Oh my god! Did you hear that? This guy that doesn't have a face that we just said was his lawyer, and we chopped it up however we feel like it.
footage.
I'm
of the
motherfucking
interview
sexy.
he did with Panos, the head of ERCI.
I did get my
and
tongue split.
I'm listening to the undercover
It is.
recording
It is,
we
isn't
have
it, Aris?
now.
Thank you, Panic
Panos
Stasis.
denied all of these allegations to the police and publicly. He said they were partaking in no money laundering at all, and I'm pretty sure I just heard his
Oh,
lawyers say
thank you
to us
so
on
much for the 1,000 bits anonymously. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much for that. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. We got a lot more to go because it turns out Lauren's dishonesty is real bad. It's real bad. Thank you for the support.
They laundered $500,000. I mean, we have to send this to police. This could actually
Snitch!
impact.
Oh, motherfuckers! Motherfucking snitches! Oh, I hate snitches. Oh, I fucking hate them. We gotta go to the cops over this money laundering. Fucking snitch! Snitch! Not even fucking American cops, not even Canadian cops. She's just fucking picking some random person, and we all know that wasn't the lawyer. There's no fucking way she talked to the goddamn lawyer, and there's no fucking way that the lawyer admits to a crime with some random fucking journalist idiot. Nah. What we got on our hands is a motherfucking snitch of snitches. The queen of the snitches. The worst type. Let's continue.
To the court case.
That is so convincing. Okay, here's the problem with alternative media. People like
True.
Lauren, people like me even,
People
are
like
not
me even.
accountable to anyone.
True.
We can just say whatever the fuck we want. People in
Well, not
mainstream
anymore.
journalism, whatever you think about them, can get fired for like making up quotes. Boris Johnson, guy who gets away with everything, was fired for making up a quote. I, on the other hand, can just waltz in here and say that I spoke to a refugee in Paris.
I love
and
this.
He said, "Yes, I am a refugee. I met with Lauren Southern in 2018. She told me to go back to my country and then proceeded to shoot me in the balls.
In the balls?
With a, how you say it, flare gun.
In the fucking balls?
I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is huge. This could really impact the.
Thank you so much,
Lauren. Even if this
Thank you
really
so much,
is
Lotta
Panos'
Apples. Thank
lawyer,
you.
the lack of verification is still stunning. We're never told what the lawyer's name is. We don't know if the phrase "we were laundering it" is him admitting to something or just describing the charges. There's no
Obviously.
clarifying question from the interviewer, and the wider context of the conversation is completely absent. Panos and his colleagues were released on bail in December 2018, so no, he wasn't still in custody when Borderless came out. In 2020, Amnesty International published
Every single bit of this is a lie. There's not a single drop of truth in the entire fucking video.
a breakdown of the investigation against Panos and his colleagues.
Just all lies.
Look, they even addressed the money laundering charge, which apparently relates to a fundraiser done by 2 of Panos' volunteers. Hey, it looks like they haven't uncovered any wrongdoing so far. I guess they never received that definitely real confession that Lauren is definitely sincerely reacting to here. Hey, Lauren? Hey? Honestly, I think it would be in Lauren's interest to just concede the point about trafficking, especially since one of the groups that was investigated for trafficking was none other than Generation Identity.
Oh no!
Really, in July 2017, barely 2 months after Lauren's stunt, a group of Defend Europe activists were deported from Cyprus after they arrived on a vessel with 21 Sri Lankans, 5 of whom ended up claiming asylum. The GI activists were accused of giving out false documents, but were released for a lack of evidence. Who says The Guardian doesn't do both sides, eh? Coming back to the Aquarius, they were already acquitted of a €200,000 fine that the Italian government tried to seize from their NGO. As for their ongoing investigation, let's look at that. Part 3.
All right, so that we're all clear and on the same page. This is the investigation. We're about to dive in and fact check the investigation against the ship that Lauren Southern has been going after. The one that Lauren Southern went and protested and held up a flare and said, "No immigrants, no more immigration, get the fuck out." That shit, we're investigating the claims now with Loanerbox against that, okay? And it's real interesting. So let's keep going.
10 tons of HIV. So it looks like we're clear on smuggling charges, but that still leaves the primary accusation against the Aquarius: the mismanagement of toxic waste.
The whole ship and operation was just operating illegally, which is why it was shut down. They were dropping toxic waste in the Mediterranean. I think it had like HIV on it. I think it was like tons of it, 10 tons of it. It was crazy.
10 tons of HIV.
So these were
that's crazy.
HIV infected like clothing and stuff. They
I'm
were
messing
dumping it
with
into. You can look this up. This is all
Well, don't mind if I do. I do wonder why she brought this up, because there was no mention of toxic waste before 2018, which kind of suggests she was looking for a post hoc justification, but oh well. In any case, Lauren is being conservative here. It was actually 24 tons. This was another one of Salvini's claims against the Aquarius, and where do you start? First of all, I'm not sure why she thinks it was dumped in the sea. As far as I've been able to find, the waste was handed over to local authorities in containers labeled as special waste, which would just be standard procedure. The problem was that apparently some of the contents should have been labeled as toxic waste. The toxic waste they were referring to was the discarded clothes of refugees who had been rescued. According to Salvini and the prosecutors, the clothing had been contaminated not just with HIV, but also with meningitis and tuberculosis. Despite the fact that none of these diseases can be transmitted on clothes.
Uh-oh! cops were being racist. What a surprise! And Lauren was repeating their racism. What a fucking surprise! Wow!
Hell. Okay. You can't get HIV from clothes, or from phones, toilet seats, spoons, or cups, in case anyone needed to know.
It can't survive outside of a
Tuberculosis
house.
is spread from the air and can't be transmitted through clothes. And meningitis is transferred directly from the nose and throat and can't be carried on clothes. This is the investigation that the Italian authorities persisted with, by the way. So not only did Lauren try to use this to justify her actions after the fact, she also seems to have been putting a strange amount of trust in someone who invented AIDS burqas. And Lauren definitely knows who Salvini is. She follows him on Twitter, and then she also mentioned him in her Vindicated video.
Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini blocked the ship from docking at its ports.
Illegally,
saying,
in violation of
"Today,
international law."
Italy will start to say no to human trafficking and no to the business of illegal immigration.
Business of
I
illegal
didn't even
immigration.
stop the boat. GI didn't stop the boat. We didn't touch it. And the Italian government is doing exactly that. And what are you guys going to do? Are you going to call the government enforcing its laws terrorists?
Well, terrorist, that's a bit strong, but remember I told you about migrants being stranded after the port closures and how some prosecutors thought that might be illegal? Well, it turns out Salvini went on trial this month because leaving people stranded at sea for 2.5 weeks could potentially be classed as kidnapping. And that's not even the first time he's been in trouble with the law, so yeah, that guy. Part 4, illegal immigration. Okay, so I think it's safe to assume that Lauren and definitely Generation Identity did not try to stop the boat because of some deep-seated concern for trafficking or tuberculosis trousers. The real thing she emphasized both back then and now was illegal immigration. That was the thing they were chanting after all.
No more! No more! Illegal immigration! No more! No more! Illegal immigration!
But in a lot of cases, even the reasonable lefties, their problem with me is something that I'm not going to be able to apologize for, because they think the problem.
You will never apologize, and we know it. We know you're a fucking snake. We've all known you're a fucking snake. And yeah, I'm not one of those so-called reasonable lefties. I don't want a Nazi to think I'm reasonable. Ever.
Problem inherently, like f all the context with the boat and shit. They think the problem is that I'm against illegal immigration, and I still am.
Now, it is technically true that turning up to a country unannounced on a dinghy boat or a rescue vessel is illegal. The problem is, the framing here is very misleading. Because if this isn't a proper channel, the question becomes, what else is a refugee supposed to do?
See, now we're getting into the next part. This is where Lonerbox really kicks it up a notch and starts to look at the whole situation. So let's keep going, because I'm telling you, there's a lot more to talk about and think about here. And this is really why I wanted to share this with you all, because we're going to get into the full analysis and why Lauren Southern really is a fucking piece of shit.
Like, if you're having to flee war or persecution or a failed state, you can't really be expected to just grab a visa and fly over. Given that the death rate in the central Mediterranean is 1 in 50 on a good year, this journey is mostly a last resort. That's kind of the point of being a refugee. After watching quite a bit of Lauren's content, I noticed she makes legal arguments quite a lot, but she never mentions international laws on immigration. Probably because it would completely contradict her position. For example, the UN Convention on Refugees specifically makes an exception, stating that refugees are allowed to enter the country illegally.
Thank you very much for the
and
gift
that
of
the
sub.
contracting state is obligated to hear their case. In case you noticed it, I should also explain what they mean by coming directly there. The wording here often gets misunderstood, but directly is only a reference to whether or not they settled in a previous state. And contrary to popular belief, refugees have no obligation to claim asylum in the first safe country they arrived in. I know that fact might be upsetting to some people, but really it makes sense. As the UN put it themselves, forcing people to stay in the first safe country puts an arbitrary and disproportionate burden on whatever country happens to be next door. For example, if a civil war breaks out in Scotland, then I'm sorry, but you can't just expect me and 3 million other wankers to go and live in fucking England. That's just not fair on anyone. The only possible exception to this rule is the Dublin Agreement for EU member states, which doesn't really force people to stay in the first safe country, but it can sometimes undermine their asylum claim if they don't. So the people arriving in Europe are acting within their rights. But I know there are some tentacles that Lauren can grow for this argument. Part 4.3 Economic Migrants. I mean, this one is basically mainstream at this point. They're not refugees, they're economic migrants. In her older video, Lauren even claimed to have pretty strong backing for that position.
These ships had been portrayed in the media as helping and saving drowning refugees. And of course, the media completely neglected the research by both the UN and the EU, which confirmed Generation Identity's position that these were economic illegal migrants from non-refugee nations that were being trafficked and not saved.
So I don't know if this was what the UN or the EU said.
That's a lot of claims in one sentence.
She hasn't put any sources, and the closest I could find to it was an article from UN Dispatch, which said, some of the migrants aboard the Aquarius are certainly economic migrants, but initial processing in both France and Spain revealed that many were likely legitimate asylum seekers who have the legal right to seek asylum. And then it goes on to attack the politicians who make all the same arguments Lauren does. So, not much of an endorsement there, really. Now, you might have noticed I've been using the words refugee and migrant kind of interchangeably. And that's because the people arriving on the boats are really a bit of both. It is absolutely true that not everyone arriving in Europe gets their claim accepted. In 2020, about 40% of the claims were accepted first time, and then a further 29% of appeals and reviews were accepted. Still, that's quite a lot of people with unsuccessful claims. We'll get into some of the reasons for that in a minute. But the real question is, what exactly is an NGO supposed to do about this? If some of the people they rescue have legitimate asylum claims and others don't, how are they supposed to know that?
Good question.
They're not, because that isn't their job. Even if they wanted to, they have neither the means nor the right to assess people's immigration status. All they can do is rescue people and help them complete their journey. And Lauren has some questions about that too. Part 4. Safe ports.
Maritime laws are that if anyone is near a boat that is drowning, any ships out in the Mediterranean, you have to go and save them. NGO or not, you have to go and help them. And then when you follow maritime law, you have to take them to the closest port of safety.
Right, so she is at least correct that states and NGOs are obligated to rescue people in distress. Awesome. She's almost correct about them having to go to the nearest safe port, but not quite. The term used in UN guidelines is the next port of call, and as they say themselves, there are a number of possibilities here. It can often be the nearest safe port, but as they say, the safety and dignity of those rescued and the crew must be the overriding consideration. This is where it gets a bit difficult because not every country has the same opinion on what counts as a safe port. The EU couldn't even agree on whether or not Mali was a safe country despite them having an FGM rate of 91%. Hungary has a list that seems to exclude US states.
For those who don't know what FGM is, that's female genital mutilation. They have a 90% rate of female genital mutilation in the populace of Mali. And the UN couldn't agree whether that was a safe place for migrants to go.
The death penalty, which is funny. In 2018, Germany was trying to declare Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria as safe countries, whilst the EU rejected this idea, which was probably the right call given that Tunisia still doesn't even have asylum legislation, and Algeria just recently expelled over 3,000 migrants to Niger without due process. Spain does consider Morocco a safe port, but that doesn't really matter here because Moroccan waters were further away from the Aquarius. No law was being broken here. What I find really weird is that she also
Imagine that. No law was being broken at all, and yet you have these motherfucking ghouls These right-wing anti-immigrant ghouls. All of them crawling out of the woodwork to fucking talk about legal this and legal that, and they never actually do their research. These people do this shit for a living. They know what they're fucking doing.
Libya as a safe port.
And working as a trafficking service, not a rescue service. So instead of bringing them to the closest port in Libya and Morocco, they were accused of bringing them to Spain, which is clearly what was happening, or Spain or Italy.
Hey, Lauren, I don't expect you to know this. You only went and made a documentary about the whole thing. But there might be a couple of problems with sending rescued people to Libya. You know, Libya, the country that's only gone and had 2 civil wars in the last 10 years. Incidentally, one of the only countries for which the UN had to write a standalone press release emphatically saying it couldn't be considered a safe port. Look, they even stress the point. Commercial vessels must not be directed to bring rescued passengers back to Libya. Now, she did say this in a free-flowing conversation, but it wasn't an accident. Sending rescuees to Libya was also the intention of Generation Identity.
You mean the entire group she was working with was basically pushing to ensure that migrants and refugees got put in the worst possible place? You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like to me that Lauren wants them to die. Doesn't it? Isn't that what it sounds like? Isn't it sound like Lauren's thinking about how they can do this without getting their own hands bloody? Without getting her little prissy hands bloody? Weird, isn't it? That's a little bit strange.
She was told this was their plan.
And we also say if we, for example, see migrants who are actually in danger, we'll of course rescue and save them, but we will bring them back to the Libyan coast.
And hey, it turns out they weren't even alone in thinking this. There's also at least one prominent politician who thinks Libya has safe ports.
Guess who?
And can be seen as a trustworthy country. Oh look, it's this guy again.
Salvini!
You know, maybe this is why so many people were struggling with their asylum claims. Maybe the threshold for refugee status is being set a little too high if countries in civil war are being described as safe ports. Maybe. Of course, Salvini would have to say that, because in 2017, Italy signed a memorandum of understanding where they gave financial support to the Libyan Coast Guard in exchange for them intercepting refugees and taking them back to Libya. And if it's really just the law that Lauren's concerned about, you'd think she'd be against this given that it would directly violate international laws.
Lauren, have a
against the
wonderful night.
refoulement
Thanks
of
for coming.
refugees. After being returned to Libya, refugees
Lauren
were
X.
reported
Pandemis,
to have
that is.
faced arbitrary
Oh, this one.
detentions, torture, enforced disappearance, sexual violence, exploitation, and trafficking within Africa. By this year, the number of people intercepted was at least 60,000. Occasionally, the Libyan Coast Guard has even been known to violently interrupt NGO rescue missions. In 2016, one of these clashes, which was partially caught on camera, involved the LCG boarding an overcrowded dinghy, beating people, and causing the boat to rupture. The Sea-Watch NGO managed to pull most of the migrants out of the water, but estimates were that at least 25 people had drowned. And after a spike in detentions and detention-related abuses in Libya, the memorandum was renewed in early 2020. Part 5.
So I just want to take a second there, because that's pretty fucking heavy. But this is the shit that Lauren was contributing to. This is the shit that Lauren was boosting and playing a fucking vigilante to. This. That is what Lauren wanted these people to get pushed into. That's what she was advocating for, and that's what she defends to this day. Let's continue, shall we?
The pull factor. The idea of a pull factor is essentially that NGOs were encouraging people to make the journey over when they otherwise didn't have to. My first thought is to wonder how practical this is. The idea that people would make a split decision to sell their belongings, jump on a shaky little dinghy boat and risk drowning on the chance that they might be saved is, I don't know. But we don't need to get into that because we can just look at the evidence she gives.
Like, I don't think those boats should be going through the Mediterranean. I think that people are drowning because of that, and they should probably have a policy similar to Australia, where they're like, no, you go through the proper refugee migrant process. Otherwise, we get increased drownings. I really think people should look into the data on that because there is a pull factor.
So that's pretty simple, right? The boats were getting stopped, and as a result, less people were drowning. Whether that's a correlation or a causation, we'll find out in a minute. But what she says about the number of deaths is true. The clampdown on NGOs started around 2017 with the Italy-Libya deal, and then with the appointment of Salvini in 2018. Around that time, the number of crossings fell dramatically, as did the number of deaths. That said, this is probably one of the most despicable uses of data manipulation I've ever seen. What she doesn't mention is what happened to the death rate. That's because after the clampdown, the likelihood of people drowning in the central Mediterranean had tripled.
Tripled. Fucking tripled. The death rate tripled.
Seriously, f this guy. This means a couple of things. First, it means that despite the chance of being intercepted and taken to a Libyan detention center, and despite a 1 in 20 chance of drowning, some people were desperate enough to make the journey anyway. And second, it also means that the people trying to stop NGO boats because of a pull factor are kind of implicitly saying that death is a reasonable deterrent for refugees. But we should look at the pull factor theory because...
What did I say about Lauren? Huh.
The dates don't match up. In 2013, the number of crossings was already rising dramatically before there was any rescue response. Mare Nostrum was only put into place shortly after the Lampedusa shipwreck at the end of the year. When it was terminated, the death rate skyrocketed for the first half of 2015 until the NGOs started in May. So at both stages, the search and rescue missions were a response to an increase in crossings, not the other way around. And the life-saving capacities of NGOs is very easily demonstrated. You can see in this graph that the correlation between NGOs and death rates is strikingly negative. But you can see again, even when NGOs went on their annual winter break, people chose to cross anyway. The real problem with the pull factor is that it only tells a fraction of the story. For example, how could we explain this spike in 2011? Was there a sudden deployment of rescue vessels? Or was it because this was the year of the first Libyan civil war? The answer is B, of course. But that war only lasted 8 months. What about the second spike in 2014? That was because of Mare Nostrum, right? Or was it because that was when the second Libyan civil war started? This is the problem you run into again and again when you try to analyze a pull factor. On top of that, you have varying movements from different countries. So from 2015 to 2016, Syrians mostly stopped using the Mediterranean crossing, but only because the Balkan route in the east had temporarily reopened. At the same time, the number of migrants from Eritrea had halved, whilst numbers from Nigeria nearly doubled. You can't explain that with a pull factor. The reason for this was an outbreak of radical Islamist violence in northern Nigeria that led to the displacement of over 2
You mean they were refugees fleeing violence? Who could have seen this coming?
2 million people. Then another report pointed out a 46% increase in crossings in the Western Mediterranean in 2016, when there were no NGOs in the area. The same report also looks at the peak stage in 2016. There were 12 NGO vessels present at this time, but again, this isn't the whole story. At the same time, the main smuggling hub in Libya had moved to a town called Sabratha, which was controlled by militias. This briefly put the smuggling business under militia control, which meant a couple of things. First, they had more resources, which enabled more intense movements of people. And second, the smugglers were now in a bargaining position where they could degrade the quality of the boats and increase the crowding, whilst the customers had no way to complain. The result was that more people were crossing in more crowded and less safe boats, meaning the need for NGOs was more urgent. The point is, there have been studies trying to find a pull factor from Mediterranean rescue missions, and they basically conclude that there isn't one. Instead, they suggest that the main incentives are weather conditions and the political climate at home. In other words, the push factor. It turns out that people aren't really fleeing extreme poverty, war, and persecution because there's an increased chance they'll get rescued. No, their reasons for fleeing are the extreme poverty, war, and persecution. Who'da thunk it? Part 6. The New Lauren Southern. ? Before the Borderless documentary, Lauren's content mostly focused on the impact refugees and migrants had on the locals. It was the Great Replacement theory, the no-go zones, That really weird video where she films a bunch of brown people in Paris and nothing happens. From around 2019, her approach shifted, and based on her recent interactions, it seems to have stayed that way. One of her lead-up videos to Borderless is even called Changing My Mind on Immigration, which
Changing my
Lauren
mind.
apparently sends to people when they challenge her views.
And I like changing my mind on immigration. Did that 3 years ago. That title. And I'll tell you right now, 99% of the people criticizing me haven't seen that video either. Someone making an accusation of me, I send them the link to the video, and every time it's useless. I'll even DM these people sometimes and be like, here, watch this, please. And they tell me, F off.
I find this video a
Good.
bit weird because I don't really
Good.
see much of a change. She still talks about her fear of demographic shifts.
But these incidents, while horrifying, are only symptoms of an underlying problem. It is a broader demographic change that brings with it not only the most visible, violent stuff, but the more insidious, creeping changes.
The degradation of European cities.
But for the people who live in Paris, it has become a dangerous, dirty, and hostile city.
The casting away of European culture.
Many here will know too well the jokes we can no longer tell, the words we can no longer use, the characters or shows and songs that have been cast on the pyre of political correctness. But even the loss of these things pales in comparison to what we are casting away in our pursuit of political correctness. Namely, our culture, our history, our future, our security.
She doesn't really describe Europe as being conquered anymore, which is...
Did you hear how close to the 14 words that was? You hear how fucking close that was to the 14 words? Did you catch that?
Oh.
Remember, Lauren Southern with the 1488 Tiffany bracelet. Just remember that. Just remember that.
Awesome.
What happens when you get a Muslim majority in France? What happens when you get a Muslim majority in London? You have these places that are literally being conquered.
I'll link this video in the description if you don't believe me, but really the only change I could see was an aesthetic one. The way she does this is by moving some of her focus away from Europe and towards the refugees. She goes to Paris and interviews people who were sleeping rough after they were unable to claim asylum. She does correctly point out that a lot of people will arrive here with no documents, only to end up in a legal grey zone. What she doesn't mention is how this might be more of a reflection on the EU states, given that the UN Convention on Refugees does highlight the obligation to assist people who don't have travel documents, but whatever. Then there's the very obvious selection bias. If you look for migrants on the streets, you're going to find the ones who ended up on the streets. The ones who were not granted asylum. But those are the only ones she wants you to see.
You're looking only for migrant people?
Exactly,
or for, illegal migrant people?
Illegals, yes. Oh, there's a bunch of tents under. Oh shit, that's a whole tent area down there.
I know, Leah.
Right, hopefully we will have some very happy migrants.
Fortunately, when Lauren was filming this scene for Borderless, she was also being filmed for a documentary called White Noise. And that means we get to see a few of the
Sure Shot.
interviews
Good to see you.
that she chose to leave out of her production. Of course, the guy who makes the cut is the one who says he misses home.
Does he miss his home country?
Mali me manque beaucoup. Depuis le premier jour que je suis au Mali, tu vois, non.
He says, I've missed Mali since the day I left, is what he says.
Surtout le parcours que j'ai fait, je viens. C'est une erreur. C'est une grande erreur.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Big help.
That's the humanist spin there. Keep the boats out because it's the best thing for them as
For their
well as for
own
us.
good.
That wouldn't have worked if she'd shown you this guy instead.
Would you ever go back?
For now, I don't think I want to go back for now because my life is in danger, that's why.
Right.
Obviously, this guy was kept out of Lauren's film. What we never hear
Weird
about
how
in this
that works, huh?
documentary is the story of people who had their asylum claims accepted and are now living a good life in Europe. When she does mention them, for example in Ireland, where rates of refugee acceptance are quite high, she pivots straight back to the old Lauren and only gives the opinions of cherry-picked locals. Locals who have opinions like this.
It was misrepresented to the people of the town, and that a lot of the migrants who are living in it are not they're economic migrants rather than genuine people who were oppressed or something of that nature. I don't know whether that's really true or not, but that is a commonly held belief.
Well, I'm sold. Although she does also interview an Irish journalist on the issue.
Uh-oh.
By journalist, I mean disgraced anti-vax conspiracy theorist who thinks the Troubles were staged. Like, all of it.
On Were the Troubles an entire staged event? It's quite possible, including some of the bombings that took place in the UK. So, because we really now have learned so much from our history that most of these major events in history were set up by this cabal who are setting up this pandemic.
Remember, this is the documentary that Lauren wishes more people had seen. But this is where you find out that these approaches aren't all that different. Before Borderless, the argument was that refugees shouldn't come because they'll outbreed the locals, they'll create no-go zones, they'll undermine European culture. Now, it's that they shouldn't come because the EU governments will make sure no one is there to save them when they drown, the Libyan Coast Guard will intercept them and take them to detention centres, and if they go to Europe, the EU governments will bypass international law and treat them like shit. I suppose if you change the wording, that second one definitely has a more humanitarian aesthetic. It appears sympathetic to refugees, and a lot of racists were probably very angry at Lauren for doing that. But of course, racist people are idiots. What they didn't notice is that the subtext behind these two approaches is exactly the same.
Exactly the fucking same.
What they both ultimately say to refugees is don't come. And to the EU states, the policy prescription is also the same. It's ignore international refugee laws, use bogus investigations to stop the rescuers from doing their jobs, start describing countries that are riddled with human rights abuses as safe ports, make deals with those countries in exchange for them brutally policing your borders for you. Anything you can do to make sure they don't come.
Do not come. Do not come.
But this is the thing with using deterrence against refugees. The international law is simple enough. If you want refugee status, all you can really do is turn up and claim asylum. It doesn't matter if you don't have your visa, or if you turned up in nice clothes, or if you didn't make the most dangerous journey on Earth with your wife and kids for extremely obvious reasons. And it absolutely doesn't matter whether or not you turned up on a plane or on a raft made out of sea turtles. It's your right as a human being. It makes sense that people like Salvini are resorting to all these insane measures because really, it's all they have. All they can do is be as performatively cruel to refugees and NGOs as possible to try and stop them making the journey. And it hasn't worked, because after all the seizures, all the investigations, all the dodgy as fuck shenanigans of Italian and Libyan governments, people are choosing to make the journey anyway. The number of crossings from 2019 to 2020 more than doubled, and this year, they've gone up by a third. If there's anything we can learn from the recent footage at Kabul airport, it's the fundamental flaw of deterrence. People will literally hang on to the wheels of planes if they have to. Because unless you can make the refugee process more unpleasant than life in a failed state, people are going to leave. No amount of anti-humanitarian leapfrogging is going to stop that. And Lauren, if you have found your way here, hi. Look, I hate leftists sometimes. Mostly I hate the way people with platforms who should really know better just seem to come at you with all these ham-fisted accusations, but mostly I hate that because it makes it very easy for you to avoid criticism. But we both know that you don't just get let off the hook because you didn't shoot any flares. What you did and what you were trying to achieve was an act of insanity. And the fact that you are still so adamantly trying to defend it is, frankly, it's interesting. And I'm going to put my cards on the table here and say, you didn't do this because of bad information or because of some whimsical ignorance of international law.
No, she
Maybe
didn't.
A better question to ask would be, if you knew the NGOs were all acting perfectly within their rights, would you have been against them anyway? Of course you would have. Drownings, trafficking, biochemical niqabs, none of these really mattered to you, did they? And they definitely didn't matter to Generation Identity. They're proxy issues. Proxy issues that you use to waste people's time because it's just bad form these days to say there are too many brown people coming to white country. But I could be wrong. And if you really do plan on just going forward as some kind of moderate, both sides conservative, then honestly, I wish you all the best.
I
I'm all
don't.
for the idea
I
of
fucking
reasonable
don't.
conservatives.
I fucking don't.
Counterpoints is cool. But what you did and the arguments you're making to try and defend it are not just conservatism. Did you successfully stop the boats? No. They probably would have been stopped anyway, but the point is that you tried. You got what you wanted, and now we've seen the consequences. And I'm sure there are plenty of other things you have to answer for, but, you know, this would be a start. And while I have you here, I don't mean this so much as advice rather than just a request. Don't do what Tommy Robinson did. In 2015, he did a very similar rebranding project of his own. He left the EDL, joined an anti-extremist think tank where they shaved him, put him in a suit, got him to speak slowly and say things like,
I don't want for 1 minute for you to think I'm tarring all Muslims as bad. I'm just giving you a projective view of my life. I want you to understand the stories that have happened.
And of course, it was all optics. None of his ideas had changed, and within 2 years, he was back to screaming in people's faces in front of court buildings, fighting people, defaming a 15-year-old Syrian refugee. Fucking thumb-shaped piece of shit. He's bankrupt now, and I think he tried to claim asylum in the US. You can be better than that. Honestly, I'm mostly okay with your new videos now. Your subscribers have responded to them accordingly, but there's a kind of innocence to them. Like this one where you tried to do some gotcha comparing pro-lockdown leftists to the lumpen proletariat, even though...
But by the way, I disagree with Lonerbox on this. By the way, just so we know, I disagree with him on this, just so we're clear. Because I've watched her latest videos. Do you remember the video we watched with Michael Knowles? Or Knowles, or whatever the fuck, however his fucking name is? I don't fucking give a shit. Remember that video? Yeah, I remember that video. I remember that video where they sat there chuckling about how they believe that you need to teach Native Americans to integrate with First Nation people in the case of Lauren being from Canada, because they were talking about Canada, but how they believe you need to teach them to integrate. Yeah, she hasn't changed a bit.
So the definitions were kind of sketchy and you couldn't even say the word properly.
You are literally the Lumpen proletariat. For those of you who don't know, the Lumpen proletariat is a group in Marxist thought that describes people who are supposed to be a part of the working class but were so stupid.
I mean, this kind of thing might not get you the same viewership as before, but it does mean that any future rescue workers in the Mediterranean can at least live in peace without being harassed by some deranged, swashbuckling pirate lady, and I consider that a good start.
Would you ever go back?
That's not what it means, I know.
I don't think I want to go back
just so y'all know, that was fucking stupid.
My life is in danger, that's why.
The term is lumpen proletariat, and lumpen proletariat has nothing to do with being fucking stupid. The lumpen proletariat was a concept of people who are pushed out of the working class, people who have to go into the criminal underworld, people who are prostitutes, stuff like that, people who do not exist as a part of the working class, but nonetheless work and are oppressed.
Right. Does he miss his home country?
Mali me manque beaucoup. Depuis le premier jour que je suis quitté.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Big help.
Are they refugees? I can't sit here and lie to you and pretend that they were.
Karma police, arrest this girl. Her Hitler hairdo is making me feel ill, and we have.
All right, everybody. If you like that, please go on over, give it a like, leave a comment, tell Lonerbox that Demon Mama and the Imp send their loves.
This is what you get.
All right, and we got another thing to do. We're not done yet. We're not done yet. We're not done yet. We're not done with Lauren Southern yet. Okay? Okay? And this is on a totally different subject because, as it turns out, the immigration stuff is only one part of the big, rotten pile of crap that is Lauren Southern, okay? So we're going to start this, and I'm going to let you all enjoy, and I'll be right back, okay? Keep watching. We'll talk afterwards. We got a long conversation afterwards. Mwah. Be right back.
State of the world isn't getting you down between the pandemic, climate change, and whatever the hell this is. The new Lauren Southern movie just dropped. You know, Lauren Southern. She's the born-again centrist Twitch streamer who's less about spreading the great replacement conspiracy theory with Stefan Molyneux now, and a little bit more about writing children's books. When she's not taking time to edit her own Wikipedia articles to make her look a little less alt-righty, she's doing modern-day genocide denial in the form of the Canadian mass grave hoax. If you're new to her body of work, I highly recommend checking out Jose's documentary on her films, link in the description. He's done fantastic in-depth dissections of her work and the many ways she manipulates, distorts, and outright lies to push her narrative. In the case of the Canadian mass grave hoax, things are no different. We start with a montage as Lauren dramatically makes a case for the most persecuted class in Canadian history: Christians. Immediately out of the gates, the focus is put on the church burnings and the assertion that they're the direct result of a cultural awakening that took place in the aftermath of the discovery of multiple mass graves of Indigenous children across the country. Not to disparage Lauren's deep dive into the subject on encyclopedia.com, as it's what anyone would call a fair summary of the United Nations position on mass graves. She highlights the fact that it requires more than 3 bodies to be buried in the same location and emphasizes that it be victims of extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions.
Definition by the United Nations states that mass graves include 3 or more bodies buried in one spot who were victims of extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions.
Put a pin in that for now, because we'll be returning to this document later. The media goes from reporting on the discovery of unmarked graves at the local level to internationally, and soon people are marching on the street in protests, and ultimately the entire thing is blamed on both the government of Canada and the Catholic Church. It culminates in the inevitable backlash against empty or abandoned churches across the country going up in flames. It would appear the whole thing could also be part of a massive conspiracy, and the media was omitting key information. Lauren decides to take it upon herself to crack the case,
Lance has a good
and
voice,
teams
Steve.
up with Keane Bexte, a self-described Albertan nationalist. He was also the Rebel News correspondent
Okay, I'm sorry,
responsible
guys. That's really funny. The fact that there's an Albertan, that's like being like a Texas nationalist.
For claiming
Unironically, that's like being a fucking Texan nationalist.
the Trudeau government's decision to make people arriving into the country during a pandemic stay at a 3-star hotel to avoid a possible contamination was akin to a gulag.
Justin Trudeau doesn't get to determine what goes in Keane Bexte's body. You know what? I don't give a shit. I'm going to go to a COVID jail. I was told that the locks have been removed from the doors.
Yeah,
Did you hear
everybody,
that?
while you're watching this, I want you to pop open that link to the Loner Box vid, and I want you to leave a comment from Demon Mama and the Imps. Let's give some love. I want people to see this fucking shit, don't you? Get it into the algorithm. Leave those comments, raid with love.
I'm sorry? The locks have been removed from the doors. Locks, like deadbolts.
Not really.
Really hungry, haven't eaten, and just please give me a call when the food is coming.
Immediately, they just start asking questions.
Why would tribal chiefs be stating these were overgrown graveyards?
And then she sprinkles in a little dose of conspiracy theory.
And all before an election. Things were simply not adding up.
To lead us into a drone-laden intro. Lauren and Keane display their complete bewilderment that tribal chiefs and residential school survivors have no interest in talking to them, especially when a cursory Google search.
Hold on, I gotta do a little request. Eddie's wife. That's what I did. I split my motherfucking tongue. Thank you. There you go. Let's get back to it.
Will reveal that Lauren has previously held interviews with such prestigious figures as Faith Goldie.
Thank you, Sure Shot. Good job. Hell yeah, Sure Shot.
Yeah.
Sorry. Can we go back real quick? Let's rewind a little bit and see that. Hold on 1 second. Let's watch this again.
No interest in talking to them, especially when a cursory Google search will reveal that Lauren has previously held interviews with such prestigious figures as Faith Goldie.
Of our people and a future for white children.
Yeah.
That's the 14 words.
Is that controversial though? Like, I don't see that that's controversial. Is that bad?
Like, my husband, I think it's controversial to say the opposite.
Holocaust denier, member of the identitarian movement, Martin Sellner.
No, but I think you're much fierce than many many of the activists I know. But you're right, of course, it's a dangerous mission.
And Alexander Dugin, the founder of the National Bolsheviks Party, aka the Nazbols.
Normality today is matriarchy, feminism, LGBT, broadening the experience with drugs and so on. That is normal. That is almost obligatory for millennials.
There's actually several scenes of them mistaking people not wanting anything to do with them as potential cover-ups of something more
Yeah, that's Caleb Maupin's buddy.
Sinister.
What are they hiding? Like, why are they so afraid to talk to media?
We've given them a month, actually, and they're satisfied with the status quo. So that's the story, right? They're happy with you being misled.
Lauren is further confused when members of the local church won't comment immediately on a highly charged issue with a stranger who has only identified herself as a journalist named Lauren.
This topic, I literally hear like the soul leave their body when I ask about the church attacks or the residential school.
No one will talk to them, which surely can only mean that there's something else going on here, which means it's as good a time as any to visit one of the actual grave sites and be as respectful as they can be by following the rules. No drone use, live streaming, video recording, photography, that noise.
To launch the drone, to fly it over
Lance does have a great voice.
this area that a lot of people don't want to be seen for whatever reason.
GPR scan, which presumably led to these flag markings, was done by Dr. Sarah Bollier, who has since stated her findings are simply preliminary and cannot be confirmed yet.
In the following slides, I will call the targets of interest probable burials as they demonstrate multiple GPR characteristics of burials, but only forensic investigation with excavation will be able to conclusively determine this.
Now, Lauren only plays about 15 seconds of Dr. Sarah Bollier's 18-minute presentation and ignores the bulk with purpose, which is too bad, because she does an excellent job explaining her methodology. GPR alone wasn't used to determine the presence of the bodies. The child's rib bone they'd found had already done that.
Part of the reason these 2 acres out of 160 were selected for this GPR survey was because a juvenile rib bone and a tooth were discovered.
In fact, the GPR wasn't used to detect organic matter at all. It was used to figure out exactly how large this particular unmarked graveyard of children was. That was combined with additional information such as accounts of survivors, historical documents, school records, and other testimonies to form a case. It's detective work and combines many of the tools of modern archaeology. Most importantly is the fact that the idea of missing and murdered Indigenous children is not new. It's been widely established by thousands of interviews in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The survivors of this cultural genocide are still alive today.
For me, it is very hard to talk about it. I didn't even talk about the abuse in residential schools to my children. And today they're shocked to hear all what is happening, especially finding of the babies. Many of our children who ran away during the winter and froze to death on their way home. And the IELTS, the black robes, start lying about the children. Oh yeah, they're doing fine here. In the meantime, they were missing and no one had searched for them.
Nevertheless, the fact that she skips over the presentation can be forgiven as they state their next step will be to speak to an expert on the subject.
Some of those markers are like weirdly close to each other.
Now, what we need to do is speak to an expert on ground penetrating radar and see if that level of preciseness is accurate, or are they just putting stakes in the ground?
2 weeks later. Turns out, rather than speak to any experts, Keane has his own research he seems very confident about.
From the Journal of Applied Geophysics. This was from 2009.
Using the abstract of a study, aka the part before the introduction, they conclude that GPR technology often leads to incorrect results.
So yeah, one of those things that was repeated by almost every study and every expert, even the experts who did some of the research on these graves, was it cannot detect organic matter.
Yeah, no shit. GPR isn't a corpse machine. It detects anomalies in the soil. So for instance, if you dug a shallow grave and put a body in there and filled it with soil, it would detect a depression present that would appear different than had nothing happened at all.
But it wouldn't see a pile of bodies that has been there for 60, 70, 80 years. It's just not how GPR works.
Right. Yeah. From what I've seen, looking at some of the studies available online, really it'll just show you anomalies in the ground. And this is even what Sarah Belliet.
It's at this stage that I'd like to point out that the description of our video contains a grand total of 0 links to any studies or reports, making it difficult to determine if she's read material on GPR or cereal boxes that have the letter G on them. Nevertheless, we found the study that Keen referenced and read as far as the conclusion, which states, "Our investigation showed that GPR surveys are useful tools for identifying unmarked graves and that the probability of detecting their correct location is very high under conditions mentioned in this paper." Even in the abstract itself, if they had just read past the first paragraph, they'd realize that GPR is intended to be compared with soil and vegetation properties of the sites examined. Which again, if they had played more than 5 seconds of Dr. Sarah Bollia's presentation, they'd realize she did.
With regards to determining number of graves, as I went through on the slides, it was ruling out different anomalies such as root systems, stones, rocks, anything else under the surface that didn't present as a potential burial. When you have a juvenile burial, because they are smaller in length, they typically are not dug as deeply. So the length would have been taken into account in addition to the depth of the burial as well.
The Smoking Gun Finale being the largest unmarked gravesite found near former Saskatchewan residential school wasn't a mass grave at all.
I'll be promoting it at the end.
These graves in Saskatchewan were apparently marked in the 60s.
The serfs.
This was not a mass grave. It was a graveyard.
Yeah. Lauren. No shit. The news story never said it was a mass grave. Like, even the fucking headline. That again, using a combination of information provided by historical data, GPR, and even the goddamn Archdiocese of Regina, had revealed several of the graves had been bulldozed.
Firstly, a rogue priest with a bulldozer is not an intentional cover-up by the Catholic Church.
They never said it was a cover-up, just that it was literally covered up, like you're inventing your own conspiracy theory to have to debunk on top of proving your point. You even mentioned that the graveyard had started 13 years before the school opened. Again, no one is disputing that. It doesn't justify if children died at a residential school and were then buried in a gravesite that had their markers bulldozed because they didn't care.
You can't just rely on a couple squiggly lines to condemn a nation of genocide. That's not how it works. That's not what the science says. But time and time again, we see journalists misreading science. They don't know what they're talking about. They claim they do, but they're lying.
So, there's so much to unpack here, and unfortunately I won't have time to do it properly. The accusation of cultural genocide against the government of Canada has already been established through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was a multi-million-dollar investigation that had thousands of witnesses, testimonies, and conclusively determined that Canada intentionally enacted a program of cultural genocide against Indigenous peoples. This is in addition to the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women that also found the country to be guilty of cultural genocide. Both inquiries proposed multiple calls to action, from ending the widespread separation of children from their Indigenous parents, to reserves not even having enough clean drinking water, to address the ongoing problems, and very few of these calls to actions have been met. So, there you have it. Well, almost it. You see, remember when I said you should put a pin in what Lauren's definition of what a mass grave is? Well, that's because in the actual UN declaration itself, it clearly states that there is no clear definition of what they actually are. Now, I know it's pedantic to argue about definitions, but again, in your own example, if you just read past the first line, you'd learn several definitions of mass graves have been offered. From a scientific perspective, a mass grave contains 2 or more bodies that are in contact with each other. After all, it's archaeologists who are the ones examining the sites and using the definition openly. And better yet, that they don't have to be the result of extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions, but can be from not having died in combat or armed confrontations. Like, holy hell, you highlighted it. At least read it next time. Oh, and you know how you said you were going to talk to an expert, but then just didn't? Well, I did. I spoke to several, in fact, like Jonathan Driver, professor of archaeology from Simon Fraser University, who says, and I quote, "What we do know is that GPR can detect anomalies in the soil and that this technology has been used to successfully find unmarked graves. And we also know that children did die at residential schools because there are records of this. And we know that GPR anomalies have been found around residential schools that require further investigation. Oh, and I also spoke to the manufacturing company that makes the technology used inside GPR devices."
How do you counter misinformation? In a word, it's total BS. I mean, it's used all the time for this application. I don't know how else you counter that other than to say, talk to the police who are using it, talk to the researchers who are using it. Now, most of the time, bodies that have been buried for years or decades or hundreds of years are long since dewatered and decayed and everything like that. And they're extremely difficult to find with GPR. In fact, you probably wouldn't be able to find them with GPR. But what you can find is things associated with the burial. So things like somebody had to dig a hole to bury the body, and therefore the soil was disturbed. And you can never put the soil back into a hole the same way it came out. Finding one body buried somewhere is very, very difficult. Right? The police run into that all the time with cold cases. Is how do you tell? Because GPR can be very confusing and all this. But when you have basically an unmarked cemetery, which is the situation with the residential schools, then you pick up patterns. When you scan an area, you start to see, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't look totally natural. This is a pattern.
I mean, it sure would damage your entire thesis if it turned out that these exact same techniques of combining GPR data with other information such as historical records had been used to exhume bodies years after they had been buried. You know, like in Tampa Bay, where the remains of over 50 boys were exhumed after having been successfully located with the assistance of ground-penetrating radar over 70 years after the bodies had been buried. I guess your last remaining shred of dignity could hinge on the fact that these weren't exactly residential schools or Indigenous children being exhumed. Unlike the Carlisle Indian Boarding School, one of the oldest residential schools in the United States that opened in 1831 and closed in 1970, and the work of Clint King, who again combined the use of ground-penetrating radar with other information to locate and track Indigenous children that were buried there. And if that isn't all, here's the bodies having been exhumed from the ground and returned to their ancestral homes, you goddamn ghoul, over 100 years later.
But it wouldn't see a pile of bodies that has been there for 60, 70, 80 years. It's just not how GPR works.
Yes, that's right, Ronald McDonald with whiteface on. I haven't forgotten about you. It's actually so rich that you would want to talk about genocide and hoaxes because ground-penetrating radar has been used to find Jewish mass graves from the goddamn Holocaust. GPR is such a crucial tool used in archaeology at this point that stating that it's unable to find skeletal remains is so ludicrous that it calls into question the entire field itself. I mean, yeah, we had medicine before the fact that we knew about what the germ theory of disease was, or antibiotics, but no one is going to say that we shouldn't use those things today. Like, should we not use chemistry just because we once had alchemy, Lauren? Is that what you want? Fucking alchemy?
It cannot detect organic matter. Yeah, you said that.
This was a very difficult video to make. And I don't only mean because I have an Indigenous mother or because of how dark the subject matter is, but because it's something that both Canada and the world are just now coming to terms with. Yet it's something that Indigenous people have been screaming and begging to be heard on for decades. Many people don't realize that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created as part of a settlement agreement, and that the Conservative government at the time tried to do everything in their power to delay or stop it. What makes things worse is that even when there's overwhelming amounts of evidence, people like Lauren and person voted most likely to name his mannequins after his mother will deliberately lie and distort the truth to whitewash or hide the horrors and atrocities committed against Indigenous people. So beyond the lesson of don't trust anything Lauren Southern says at face value, the greatest one would be listen to Indigenous voices and storytellers, because theirs are the ones that have been historically silenced.
There's the link. Click on the link. Click on the link. And go leave a comment, even if it's just the imps love you, okay? We want to give this thing some love. Look at how good it's doing. Let's help the serfs out, huh? Let's help the serfs out. Click on that link. Go on over. Leave a loving comment. We got a couple seconds here. You can type it. You can put it in open it in another window. And I talked to Lance in person, just so you know. Once again, I mentioned this again. Just surpassed 666 likes. That's what I like to fucking hear. Fucking imps rating with love. That's what I like to fucking hear. When I met Lance in person, it was visible on the man's face how much he cares about this topic. Because he fucking does. And you could tell by the amount of work he put in that he went up and he fucking got spit on by a bunch of motherfucking ghouls over and over again while he tried to tell the fucking truth, okay? So if you wonder why I come back so angry and why I come back with fucking blood on my face, with fury, it's because of motherfuckers like this. It's because of motherfuckers like Destiny, who's boosted Lauren Southern. It's because of motherfuckers like all of his crew who've given this woman a fucking platform again and again when she was out of the fucking picture. She's gone to making little fucking children's Nazi books. And now she's in our spaces. Now she's in your fucking face. Her fans are crawling through all of the content creators that you like and leaving bullshit ass fucking comments. You want to know what's funny? My comments are full of her fucking shit. Her followers who come in telling me that I should die, that I should kill myself. Her people coming in and saying that I'm a man, that I'm this, that, and the other thing. Fucked. And that's why I'm mad. And that's why I got my motherfucking middle fingers up. Okay? Because fuck Lauren Southern. And fuck these people. And I will fight against these people. And we will boost the fuck out of every single thing like this that shows these people for the motherfucking lying ghouls that they are. Because it isn't just fucking games, everybody. I know we have a lot of fun on here. We do a lot of silliness. And we do fun makeup and everything like that. But when you end up dealing with people like this, these people's rhetoric kills. These people's rhetoric covers up genocide. You saw the devastation on these people who spoke about their pasts, the pain that they've had to spend. I mean, the pain that they have had to have in their lives through years of keeping dark secrets because of the pain of what they experienced. Isn't that completely fucked? And remember, we took screenshots. I got the screenshots on here. We reviewed it. I have a video on my fucking channel of Lauren smug laughing about every single little thing in that debate. Laughing during a debate about motherfucking genocide. Fuck Lauren Southern. Fuck Lauren Southern and fuck all of her little fashy fucking ghouls that scamper around and simp for her. Has this made me enemies with counterpoints? Nah. I told Counterpoints straight up. I told Connor my feelings on this. I said I felt like he did himself a disservice. And I disagree with a lot of the things he says. I really hate the fact that he pals around with Lauren Southern because I don't think he takes it seriously. And it really frustrates me because on a personal level, I like Connor. I've talked to Connor on many occasions and we've actually had good conversations, but he plays defense for people like Lauren. But guys, Connor is a small fry. You understand that? Connor is a motherfucking small fry. When you've got people boosting the shit out of Lauren Southern, when you've got people giving her advice on how to win her debates about genocide, when you've got the love bombs and the support and the raids, I'm fucking tired of it. Oh, I am so fucking tired of it. And guess what? If that's what politics Twitch or whatever is determined to be, if that's what they're up to, if that's what they think is like, you know, hey, here's what we're going to do. That's what people want in politics Twitch. Well, then guess what? Fuck politics Twitch. Because the one thing that everybody should know now, should be just incontrovertible, is the fact that we don't need Twitch politics. Twitch politics needs us. Twitch politics needs Demon Mama. Twitch politics needs the imps, but we don't fucking need them at all. We don't need their Lauren Southern laundering bullshit. We don't need their fucking transphobia, their misogyny. We don't need their fucking racism. We don't need their white bread, boring ass bullshit. They can take their boring ass snooze fest content and shove it straight up their fucking asses.